tracer rounds showed that most bullets went above the commandos' heads, but still they dashed across the pebbly shoreline. To be trapped on an exposed, featureless beach was death. The longer the soldiers lingered without cover, the longer the Germans had to aim. The warriors of No. 4 Commando unfurled coils of chicken wire over the barbed wire blocking their exits from the beach, ran across these makeshift bridges, and dove down the steep drop on the far side. Somewhat protected in a small fold in the ground, they took a moment to regroup before proceeding inland. No more than 20 of the 200 in their party had fallen on the beach, fewer than predicted. A medic volunteered to stay behind, but the rest had strict orders: leave the dead and injured, get off the beach regardless of casualties, regardless of anything. They moved inland. Group 1's gunfire from the front distracted the soldiers in the battery as hoped, while F Troop and the rest of Group 2 wound their way around, single file, silent, through a small passage in the hefty barbed wire guarding the back of the concrete monstrosity. Porteous and his troops lobbed explosives inside, killing the German soldiers and silencing their guns. Porteous was shot twice, once through the hand and once in the thigh, but he survived, as did most of No. 4. Their mission was a success. However, theirs would be the only victory the Allies could claim that day in 1942. By the time No. 4 and their freshly taken German prisoners evacuated from the base of the cliff at 08:15 with the wounded Captain Porteous in tow, they were faced with new horror. Thick layers of smoke obscured their view, but the raging thunder of machine guns and mortars at the other landing locations forced a brutal realization. Their compatriots were caught in the worst hell imaginable. Everyone else was stuck on their beaches. Every snowball begins first as a harmless flake, a diminutive nucleus of crystallized water that, given a downhill nudge, quickly accumulates power. At Dieppe, one nudge was a case of mistaken identity. In the dark, Gunboat 315 looked an awful lot like Gunboat 316, and by the time the Royal Regiment of Canada, headed for landing site Blue Beach, recognized the error and realigned behind the correct vessel, they were 16 minutes behind schedule. The Royal Air Force had dropped a thick layer of smoke to obscure the aim of any Germans who happened to be awake, but by the time the tardy Royal Regiment arrived, the punctual smoke had begun to clear. Aerial planning photographs taken months earlier had revealed the batteries gracing the tops of the cliffs, but the top-down views hadn't hinted at the surprises in their vertical faces. The Royal Regiment landed on Blue amid the parting smoke and looked up to a nasty revelation. The shelling that had started on time at the other beaches had roused the Germans, and the Germans were not only awake, they had dug into the very cliffs themselves, creating machine gun-filled nests burrowed into the sides of the steep white walls. They unleashed a furious thunderstorm of metal onto the Allies below. The few royals who survived the initial mad dash across the impossibly broad shore hunkered into small shapes, curled helpless against a meager seawall, hoping that the ships offshore and pilots in the air could take aim at the machine guns and mortars mowing them down. But it was hopeless. The officers on the ships couldn't see through their own protective smoke screen. The pilots in the air who were not equipped with rockets struggled to hit the tiny targets dug into the cliff face with guns. Those down on the beach couldn't fire upward and around corners into the machine gun grottos. Bullets and grenades peppered their sky. Not a single soldier made it off Blue Beach. Almost half of the 500 in the charge died. The unit had a casualty rate of 97%. But since the Royal Regiment never got off the beach, they also never accomplished their goal: destroy the battery at the top of their cliff. Other batteries in front of the main landing approach resisted Allied attack too. In order to get to the town, the rest of the troops would have to run south across broad, open, unprotected beaches red and white, with active guns crisscrossing their path. The deaths of the warriors at Blue and the intact battery above them were a snowball, and they triggered a crossfire avalanche. About 1,000 of the Allied landing troops were British, but more than 4/5 of the 6,086 total were Canadians, with only about 50 Americans. What happened next is considered one of the most horrifying disasters in Canadian military history. The inexperienced Canadian troops headed for red and white were convinced that tanks alone would provide the power needed to break through the German defenses.